yes, sweet like licorice. It is the Sixers Talk podcast with you once again. Danny Pommells, Noah Levick from NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com, Sixers writer extraordinaire. Ben Berry, our super producer, is waiting in the wings. But we bring in another guest here this week, Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk on social media, as well as the lead NBA writer on NBCSports.com. Kurt, we appreciate you lending us your time.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. I'm a fan of the podcast, and I rely on Noah sometimes. I'm like, man, what did he write about this? I didn't see this. So, like, you guys have a great perspective. I'm just excited to be here.
Hey, one of the things I think people overlook that are coming up now and trying to do or imitate or be what we have been managed to become is that the research is super important. Doing the due diligence and digging up all the facts and figures and analyzing things is really important. A lot going on, Kurt. We bring you in the midst of an interesting offseason for the NBA as a whole, for the Sixers particularly. We will get to Team USA shortly, as well as As the World Turns with Ben Simmons, the soap opera continues. But let's talk the NBA draft a little bit, Kurt. Here we are 3 days away, 4 days away, however you want to look at it, as Thursday is when the players will hear their names called. The Sixers pick 28th. And I think it oversimplifies it a bit, but the thing that keeps popping into my head are Sixers fans in for a trick or a treat come draft night as it pertains to the 28th pick and what the organization might do.
Can I go with a third T word and say trade?
Okay, that works as well.
I think that would be their preference, right? You're not getting anybody at 28 who can help you now. And this is obviously a win now team. So if you don't want that on the books, and obviously it's going to be expensive to be the Sixers for a while, no matter what happens with Simmons, you can trade that back, get a couple of second rounders, unless there's somebody you really like and they're really set on. But the buzz is, and they're not alone, by the way, like there's a whole lot of teams trying to move back or out of the end of the first round, just more because you'd rather use that roster spot on a veteran who can help you, even if it's a minimum guy, than if you draft somebody at 28, they're a project, man. They just are. You're not going to get some in a couple of years. They might be really good, but you're drafting at 28. That guy's not walking through the door tomorrow and helping you.
And the Sixers at 21 last year got a player that helped right away in Tyrese Maxey, and I think someone who fell down draft boards. Maybe that's a situation where it would make sense to keep the pick, but then again, kind of as a counter to that argument, you do have young players such as Maxey, such as Isaiah Joe, such as Paul Reed already within the system that this team really likes and wants to allow to continue to develop. And perhaps that opportunity just wouldn't be there for a player on the board at number 28.
Sometimes guys, you're right. I mean, sometimes guys who can help fall down the board, but if you're talking about somebody like a Trey Mann out of Florida or something, like where you're like, I like his potential and he could be on the board there, but he's a couple of years away. And maybe you can draft him and two-way him, but are you just better off going back 4 spots into the early second round where that guy's not guaranteed and save yourself a little money and get somebody, by that point you're kind of in the same tier. So it just kind of depends on what's available.
Right. And I guess essentially there aren't enough reps to go around with so many guys in the pike to be developed with, Isaiah Joe and B-Ball Paul, and as well as Tyrese and Matisse and maybe Shake Milton also you could throw in there as well. So, I mean, you can't develop with so much time as well as roster spots and contracts to, bringing these guys along. So, hoping that you get another guy who slides down boards like Matisse maybe in some instances, but Tyrese definitely. It's a little bit of wishful thinking, no?
A little bit, but sometimes it does. Sometimes in the draft, GMs become enamored with potential over what the guy can do right now, right? And it depends on where you are as a franchise and where you've got roster spots and stuff. There's something to be said for the Spurs were great at this. They draft those guys at 27, 28, 29, 30 for years, and you'd be like, they just took who? And then 3 years later, you're like, man, I want that guy on my team. That guy can flat out but they knew how to develop guys. And Philly obviously has a developmental program that works. It's just, it becomes about the roster spots and the availability. Do you have, who's available? Do you get somebody who you're like, man, again, I'll use Terrence Mann. Mann's good size for a point guard. lot of potential. If you think you can get him there in a couple of years, then, I mean, obviously they have Maxey, but if you think you can get him there, then maybe you take him, but you might be better off using that roster spot for another purpose.
And Daryl Morey obviously has a track record of being very open to trade, specifically on draft night. It's interesting, someone who comes to mind that he did take with, I believe, the 32nd pick was Montrezl Harrell, but that's back in 2015. Yeah. Obviously, for the most part, with the Rockets, he was not a big fan of keeping picks and seeing those as rotation.
Didn't he trade his last 4 or 5 first-round picks before, if I remember right, he traded after. Now you can find, Trez is a great example of the kind of, hey, he's got high energy, he's got a physique. If I can get him in the second round, that's, there's second round steals at the top of that draft. That Draymond Green guy worked out pretty well. There's guys you can get in the second round who bring something, but you're taking a little more of a risk, and that's okay, man. You get those guys, you get them into camp, maybe you get them on a 2-way, and then they turn around. And there's also just something to be said for finding those guys at the top of the second round. The hard part of this, guys, right, unless you're drafting 1, 2, or 3, and even then sometimes you're looking at 19 and 20-year-olds and saying, how are they going to be in 3 years? Is this guy going to get into the lifestyle and think, man, I've made it? Or is he driven? And is he the guy who's going to go put in the work? Like Montrezl Harrell, whatever you think about his ability, and look, he gets played off the floor in the postseason and all that. Nobody works harder. He's busting backboards right now out there in Atlanta. You got to find those guys who put in that kind of effort, who have that kind of drive. And if you can find them, there's good players at the back end.
So you've brought up man, wondering whether other guys stand out to you. Some that I know we've had on our website in some recent mock drafts. Miles Deuce McBride brings some of that hard-nosed competitiveness that you're referring to, tough on-ball defender at West Virginia. And then a guy I had the Sixers going with at 28 was Bones Highland.
I like Highland.
Yeah, from VCU. Obviously skinny, might need to put on some weight, and negative assist to turnover ratio. Not a great defender, but boy, he's electric offensively, creates space with that step back jumper, ton of confidence and range. Maybe one of those guys that it might make sense to take a swing on, in my view. But do any other prospects stand out to you?
McBride is a great guy because he's somebody I would have mentioned. He's shot 41%, and he was like a hard-nosed guy, like you said, but he shot 41% from 3. And at West Virginia, he made tough shots. And that's something that sometimes, look, your space goes away in the NBA, and certain guys, the Adam Morrison syndrome, if you will, that space goes away and suddenly they can't make that same shot against real defense. McBride was already doing that in college. Defenses were loaded up on him. He was hitting tough shots. If he can continue that over to the next level and he can make some tough shots, then you've got a real value. I mean, I like Highland too, as just a Bones can score. It's just flat out can go get you buckets. And at the end of the day, the value in the name of the game in the NBA is putting that round thing through that other round thing. You gotta put the leather through the metal thing, and if you can do that, there's a role for you.
I think it's a lot of the intrigue and hope that fans have had in the past going into the draft was lost with the way the Sixers season ended, and so much finger pointing and turmoil of how things fell apart for them so quickly, because they have had credit to this front office administration. They have had success in the past 2 drafts specifically, and picking late and getting value and players who may not have been perceived to have been as valuable as where they were drafted. But do you feel like overall league wide, Kurt, that you see the Sixers front office being highly regarded, or as more of a middle of the road, middle of the pack type of group?
Oh no, highly regarded. I mean, frankly, it was it got a little weird for a while. I mean, they had a plan, they kind of veered from the plan, but Morey brings he's been successful. He has made, like you said, it's not just that he's gone big game hunting and gone after stars, because that certainly has happened. But he's also, like you said, he's made good drafts, and maybe he takes Quentin Grimes from Houston or somebody deep. And those guys kind of suddenly you're like, hey, wait, that guy can play a little bit. You find these kind of guys. This is look, Daryl Morey had Houston successful for a long time. He got there at the end of the Yao Ming, Tracy McGrady era when that didn't work. And he evolved that thing a couple of times over his stay there and went with what worked. I'm like, hey, I don't think everybody thought James Harden it'd be interesting to see what he could be when he got out of Oklahoma City. I don't think anybody saw what James Harden was going to become as a scorer. And he rolled with that, right? He's like, well, if this is what we're doing, you know what? Let's get a pick setter for him like Clint Capella. You know what? He's better without the pick. Forget Clint Capella. Let's go another direction. They keep trying different things. There's something to be said for the practicality of what do we have to do next to make the team successful that he brings.
I think, but just to jump in real quick, like part of the pressure the Sixers face is not necessarily finding the guys that are diamonds in the rough, but actually developing them and bringing them along to a certain level to be able to contribute. So that is an area of criticism I could see of them successfully bringing guys into the fold who affect the outcomes of the games in a way that, you know, yeah, okay, you drafted them late in the, you know, Matisse Thybulle or Tyrese Maxey late, but can they come into their own on this team and make an impact?
But they kind of have, right? I think Maxey's certainly starting to have an impact. Obviously, Thybulle's
bit of a wall I think they have to overcome. So I'm looking for the next step. Like, you know, you're looking for Thybulle to be that 3-and-D guy where we're still waiting on the 3. And Maxey, you know, Doc is a little cold on rookies, but there's still a little step forward that has to be made where opportunity probably has a lot to do with that. But I think it's all part of the puzzle, so to speak.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's hard when you're taking guys that deep too. It's a little hit and miss. So they were available at the back end because they were less of a sure thing, right? So how far are they going to go? I think Matisse Thybulle's 3 will get there. I think sometimes we want to rush these things along, but they seem to have done it for me. I mean, yeah, not all these guys have panned out, but I think that was part of the process anyway, right? Like multiple bites at the apple. It's what's going on in Oklahoma City now. Like we're going to take a lot of swings and we're going to get a few hits and that's going to be good enough. And I think that they're capable of bringing these guys along with that next step. Doc kind of did it in LA. He had some guys he helped bring along a little. I think I think their staff is capable of bringing on. I don't know what that next step is, but how big a step it's going to be. But I mean, where you're drafting, if you're getting a valuable rotation player, look, once you get past 20, a lot of guys wash out, man. A lot of guys wash out. So if you can get somebody who doesn't and can bring some value, that's huge.
Ready to make a move? A Wilmington University education can take you where you want to go. WilmU works online or in person. Learn more at wilmu.edu.
This might kind of transition us into our next topic with Ben Simmons, but speaking of that next step, obviously the whole league has its eyes right now on Simmons, on Damian Lillard, on Bradley Beal. From your perspective, do you think the Sixers are best suited to be patient as things stand and hope that things devolve with Lillard in Portland and maybe hope that Bradley Beal makes the call that it's time to move on from Washington? Or do you think there should be some urgency on their end to get a deal done for Ben Simmons, even if it's not a deal that involves one of those superstars?
I think you can be a little bit patient. I think the league is waiting to find out what Damian Lillard and I'm a little cynical with Bradley Beal because haven't we had this conversation like 4 years in a row? Like, when is he going to ask out? Oh, he's not. He's been loyal to them. It seems more serious this time, but we'll see. Until I see it, and Lillard, I'll just say my sources have been more along the lines of it's a deadline at best next summer type of thing with him, that he's willing to give them a shot. He's stuck, man. He doesn't want to be seen as that superstar, right? Like pushing his way out. He's not he's like the nicest guy. He's like the most he is the low maintenance superstar up until this point. And I don't think he wants to lose that rep. He was genuinely, I had heard like genuinely stunned when he got pushback over the Billups hire up there. And he was like, this is the first time, almost like this is the first time they've been mad at me. Why are they mad at me? I don't understand. I still think he wants to work it out there, but I also don't see how they turned that roster into. You can trade CJ McCollum, you can do all this stuff, but what are you doing that makes that team better? I mean, even if you were going to do a McCollum, and I don't think they will, but like even if you were going to do a McCollum for Ben Simmons type of swap, are they better in a West with the Lakers and the Clippers and the Nuggets and the Jazz? And oh, by the way, the Suns are pretty good. Like I don't see how they take that step forward. So I think eventually he pushes his way out, and Philly's better off being a little patient, but they got to pull the trigger on that eventually. And is it a sign and trade for Lowry and bringing him back? I don't know what it's going to be, but I think you've got to get right now those first offers that came in. Yeah, I like Miles Turner too, but I don't like Miles Turner that much, man.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing. You hear the teams and the names and whatnot who might be interested in Ben. Who do you think are the teams that are the most interested and have the best chance? We hear the Mavericks, we hear Cleveland, we hear the Portland's teams and whatnot. What do you think of the teams that are out there who might have the most interest?
Yeah, the thing is that like there's teams that are dying to get better fast, but they don't really have the pieces. Like Sacramento wants to get better now. They will tie the Clippers record next year for most consecutive missed playoffs, which is that's really hard to do in the NBA for 15 years in a row. Like it's really a challenge. They desperately want to get better, but who do you want? I mean, unless they're trading De'Aaron Fox, which they're not, like who do you want off that roster? Like, and so it's kind of the same thing in Cleveland. Like, I don't want Colin Sexton. I'd be like, for Ben Simmons. So there's teams that are really aggressive right now that just don't have the pieces. Maybe you could try to make an argument for one of the guys down in New Orleans, but I don't know that, like, even if they were going to move Brandon Ingram, because he doesn't really necessarily fit next to Zion, but does Brandon Ingram really fit next to Joel Embiid? I don't know that the offers that are out there. That's why I was saying be patient. I think Dallas gets interesting if they can get in a third team and make some moves. And obviously it's the big names you're waiting on. I think you've got to see how Beal and Lillard play out for a little while and then decide, well, maybe we can go after Lowry or something else. But I think you have to see how Lillard and Beal play out.
Yeah, no, we've, in our many discussions about this, we've mostly been on the same page there and thinking with some of these rebuilding teams, it would most likely have to be a 3-team sort of configuration. Yeah, absolutely.
Because you don't want picks. Like, great, Sacramento's pick might be great next year, but that doesn't get you to the win now spot, right? Like, it's just they're in a very different place.
Simmons, obviously, what's foremost in many fans' minds is how his postseason went and the fact that he shot 34% from the foul line and all of that. From a league-wide perspective, what do you think he would have to do in a situation where he stays with the Sixers to somewhat rehabilitate his value? Do you think becoming, again, a 60% free throw shooter is enough, or do you think he has to show real, actual development that hasn't yet materialized as a willing and somewhat capable shooter?
I don't think his value dropped as far as it felt like during those playoffs. And, when he passed up that, like around the league, they're still like, all right, guy's still an all-star. Guy can still drive the rim and finish. He is second in defensive player of the year voting. And what he brings defensively, by the way, is more valuable in the playoffs. He is that drop coverage. Look, I don't want to take anything away from Rudy Gobert because Rudy Gobert just screwed up Team USA pretty good too. Like Rudy Gobert is really good, but you can start to game plan for him and make his life difficult in the playoffs. You need guys who can lock down on the perimeter in the playoffs. It's why Mikal Bridges was so valuable for Phoenix. It's what Ben Simmons can bring. Like there's a lot of teams that still want him. His value didn't drop that far. And I think that if he can just go out and get back, I mean, everybody wants to see shooting improvement, but if he can just show he's gotten out of his own head, and you're like, shoot, like you said, shoot 60% on free throws, knock down the odd jumper. There isn't a team in the league that doesn't think, maybe it's the overconfidence of teams, but I don't think there's a team out there that doesn't think, you know, when we get him in our program, we're going to be able to solve all these problems that Philadelphia didn't. And I don't think it's necessarily the program. What's the ancient Chinese proverb? When the student is ready, the teacher will be there. I think it's more about when Ben Simmons is ready. Heck, Sacramento might be able to develop him, but that, you know, like it wouldn't matter so much where he is because the light will go on with him. But every other team thinks they can flip that switch.
With the on the court stuff and the jump shot and the free throw shooting and him scoring in fourth quarters, is this little, you know, I don't know if you want to call it dissension or whatever it is, but there's a little rub between him and the team about how he wants to spend his off season and develop his game, and how, you know, from various reports we've seen from Yaron Weitzman and this most recent report, which the team has denied, that they haven't spoken much this off season. It's like a little cloud that kind of hangs over the whole situation of, you know, what Ben Simmons is and what he wants to be and what he will become. And I am of the ilk that a lot of this will come to fruition over time. He's 24 years old. Some of this stuff will develop. But what do you think that there is with this rub of him and the speculation that he's really coddled and he's kind of surrounded by a bunch of people who all maybe are afraid to tell him no, or in some instances?
Yeah, that is all over the league. Let's just say that's the idea that if you're going to improve him, you need to break him out of his shell isn't the word I'm looking for. His bubble. We'll go with bubble. That's a good pandemic word. Like you've got to break him out of his inner sanctum, get him working out with different shooting coaches, different people. You got to be uncomfortable, don't you? Like if you're really going to improve, you've got to have somebody who makes you uncomfortable and drives you that way. And there's a sense that has not been where Simmons is. And that's part of what stalled his development, is that he's not getting somebody in his face enough. And again, I got a feeling that I don't know how much of that is external versus internally wanting that. Like you've got to, you know, not everybody comes with Kobe's drive, right? Like you've got to have certain people that just takes a while for that to click. And I think that's kind of where it is with Ben. It's somewhat internal, but you've got to break him out of that. To me, from the outside, and I'm not part of Ben Simmons.
We're all on the outside.
We're all on the outside. But doesn't that seem like what you've got to do? Like you've got to find somebody who can, like, it's more mental and it's more just getting him in different places.
Maturity, maybe.
Maturity could be maturity. Yeah. Where he's just, and I guess that comes with maturity. I didn't push myself at 19 except to try to drink more. Like it wasn't like, you know, I think that comes with some time, but I think he needs somebody who can drive him that way. Right.
It's interesting because Sam Cassell, who's a new addition on the Sixers staff, seemed to be kind of the force you're describing, someone who would get in Simmons's ear. Doc Rivers even described him as the turnover whisperer early in the season. He would freak out whenever Simmons turned the ball and provide pretty forceful feedback on that. And the free throws even were trending up. He was at 67% at the All-Star break, and you figured maybe Cassell and just that new presence and that new motivator deserve some credit for that. And then something broke horribly wrong when the games were most important. And as you said, mentally was the most glaring flaw. You know, he's physically capable of making free throws, but mentally in pressure moments, it wasn't happening. So I think it's been a little mystifying for a while, both for folks on the outside and then even for Simmons. Like if he had an explanation for why those free throws weren't going in, you figured he would address it and fix it, but he wasn't able to do so. So very pivotal offseason for him, regardless of whether he sticks with the Sixers. I know he's been working again with Chris Johnson, who's a highly regarded skills trainer and someone who's helped a lot of players around the NBA with their shot, but at least with Simmons, he hasn't had much of a positive impact on that front.
Yeah.
So,
you wonder sometimes, like I said, you just wonder sometimes it's not a question of that person. Is it a different voice you need to hear? Is it, the Pat Riley theory that you can only coach a team for 7 or 8 years and somebody's got to change just because they're tired of hearing, Brad Stevens' voice and they want somebody new in there. Right. By the way, as a side note, can we get Sam Cassell a head coaching job somewhere, please? Like, the guy to me has earned the stripes, has been on Doc's staff and others. And I think he'd be a fantastic head coach as a leader of men type of thing. I think that plus I just want a whole team to do the Sam Cassell celebration after some big buckets. Watch them all get fined. But I like, that'd be so much fun. Like, I think he'd be a great head coach.
No, it's fun watching him on the sidelines. We here thought that the relationship he had with Tyrese Maxey was really paying dividends as well. So to see, the impact he has just on the guards in general has been great. I think, to your point as well with the Simmons thing, there's some things that you don't learn when everything goes smoothly, when everything is just given to you. Some those obstacles and going through the challenges are what develops, certain things in you that allows you to be a little more, have that intestinal fortitude and whatnot. And I think if you miss that, we talked about being coddled in the bubble and things like that, there's things you don't get. Sometimes you don't learn as much as you can along the way because there's lessons in those losses and the bumps and things like that.
No, I don't want to steal a line from the end of Loki for people who haven't watched all of it, but that's kind of like
go right ahead.
But the point was they made it. One point was, no, we can't skip to the end. I know what's going to happen, but I can't skip to the end. We have to go to the journey, and you have to grow. That has to be the process. It has to be the process because that's how you make movies, but and good television. But it's also what you have to have. I think it's growth as a player. It can't be linear. Growth is never linear as much as we want it to be. And obviously he's plateaued, and it's what gets that trending up again.
Yeah. And for a long time, him sticking to what he did best seems in some ways like the smart, sort of efficient brand of basketball, right? Like, why, especially in the modern game, would you take mid-range jump shots if you're not good at them? But at a certain point, kind of the underlying question is, well, is it about time that you became at least somewhat competent at this part of the game that's pretty fundamental? And certainly a turning point right now for him, no question.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like you got to get better at your weaknesses, right? Like you've got to the best players. Again, say what you will about LeBron, guy comes back every year with a new skill, right? He's like, hey, I decided I wanted to do this. I figured it out, and I spent all off season working on it. I don't know what it is now. He probably tipped it off in Space Jam, and I just haven't seen it yet.
I will be watching it on HBO Max with my son and daughter here soon. Speaking of growth, though, are we witnessing the stagnation of Team USA? We're coming off a unprecedented moment for the first time since 2004 when Manu Ginobili and those guys were able to pull it off in Argentina. Team USA lost to France here. They have a game coming up Wednesday against Iran and the Czech Republic on Saturday for a chance to still make the medal round. But this is 2021. And for the first time since 2004, we've seen them lose a game. We saw them lose to Nigeria and Australia in exhibition. Overreaction or enough reaction, Kurt? What do you think people are feeling right now? What do you think is the appropriate response?
Look, red flag should be up, right? Like it's not hit the panic button time because, like you said, they're going to play Iran. Iran's star player, by the way, is Hadidi, who was in the league, but he's now like 36. I think they can handle Iran. Then the Czech Republic are there because Tomas Satoransky almost single-handedly beat Canada. And Satoransky's a nice player, but no. So beyond that, they are going to.
But we're talking about the elite company, though.
No, that's what I mean. They're going to advance, so it's too early to panic. Right. But if they don't grow out of this, if they're not better by the time they get to that first medal round game, because they just made their life rougher, right? Now they're going to come out as the second seed out of this group, which means they're going to have to play the first seed out of another group, which is probably going to be a pretty good team. Whatever their path is now much more difficult than it used to be. And this team hasn't taken steps. And I'll even throw this to you guys. Noah, whose team is it?
I guess Durant is looked at as the guy who needs to do the scoring, and Lillard, and but they don't. It definitely doesn't seem like a cohesive group right now.
It was Drew Holiday team's late. His team late.
Drew Holiday.
It was Drew
in, almost saving the day. Yeah.
Yeah, Drew. A guy who played 40 or 48 hours earlier was in like a champagne-soaked parade on the other side of the world. Shows up and he's your best player. It's a little concerning that they didn't have. It's just, I think what's getting to me with this team is that I don't look with the Sixers. There's a pecking order, right? Embiid gets the first crack. Simmons is in there. Obviously Tobias Harris, but like there's a pecking order for where the shots come from and how that's created. And they were oversharing. There wasn't anybody. I mean, they had missed. Kevin Durant just missed shots at the end. They all kind of missed some shots that they would normally make. But beyond that, Damian Lillard had a wide open three and a lane to the basket in front of him, and he passed it. And Zach LaVine did the same thing. And there's a certain guys, we're more athletic than everybody. Just go get the bucket, man.
They're just deferring, just too much deferring. They
way too much.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think they're all deferring to KD. They expect him to be the heavy and score the baskets, but he's 4 for 12. It's not clicking. And we see so much of these guys, Jason Tatum, Dame Lillard, these alpha dog, situations where they're able to just excel, but yet here and the ball's a little smaller, a little different. I mean, Luka Doncic isn't having any problems doing anything at all.
Luka played with it, but yeah.
By the way, I'm just saying. Point being is that these guys are are they in a little bit over their head at this point? Or what's the issue as you see it?
First off, by the way, I was not in Vegas this time, but I'll tell you from previous times being around Team USA, they hate the ball. They all hate the ball. The material's a little different. It's just not. You've played with one ball pretty much your whole life, and then there's this new one. It's weird, but it's not that bad. It's not that big a deal. I don't know. To me, I think that my biggest issue is almost structural beyond who did and didn't show up, because I still think we're the most talented team. When we lost in 2004, right, and then Krzyzewski and Colangelo step in and rework the whole thing. If you wanted to play in the 2008 Olympics, you had to play in the 2008 Worlds. You had to show up to certain workouts. We're not going to be able to build the chemistry and camaraderie that the French guys have or that the Australian guys have, because they've played together as a unit for so long from youth, U16, U17, and our team is more slapped together. But we could approximate that somewhat, right? We could get some of that done. And we didn't this time. This team was slapped together. Pandemic was part of that, but a lot of these guys did not play in 2019. And without that kind of continuity, you just end up with a bunch of individuals. And right now they just look like a bunch of individuals still trying to figure out, you said, the pecking order of who shoots, and they're being too differential. The defense comes and goes. And I'm not sure who the leader of that team is, even though, outside of this being Durant's team in theory, Damian Lillard is a leader. Draymond Green is there are guys who should be vocal leaders in there. And maybe this wakes them up and they step up, but I have to see it. And they're going to win their next 2 games. And I'm still going to think it's a mirage until I see it against a good team.
Kurt, you mentioned the continuity. You mentioned, whose team is it, so to speak. There's also these rumblings about players being unhappy with the system of the Spurs system, what Greg Popovich is running. Is that overblown, or do you think there's some truth to that? I think
it's a real challenge to fit NBA players into an international style Spursian system, right? Where that differential of good for great is a little, those guys buy in. It's much easier to run that system when Tim Duncan is your best player and he's fully engaged, right? And even a little bit beyond that, it's baked into who the Spurs are. It's hard to impose that a little bit. And I think, is it just me, or do they need to go back to being a little more of an NBA team and just, hey, shoot some threes, drive the lane, and let's if we've got all these great individuals, let's unleash these great individuals a little bit.
For Sixers fans, a lot are following Matisse Thybulle, who started brightly, 5 steals in the first game. I think it's interesting you talk about style in the international game being different. And at least in my view, maybe Thybulle is someone whose game is suited well for international play because he can be a little more physical and aggressive and not have to be worried about being called for ticky-tack fouls as frequently. And he's someone who seems to be integrating very well into an Australian team that has played a long time together, and this is his first international experience, but so far, so good for him.
By the way, is it just me, or I think Matisse Thybulle could come home with gold. I really think that they have a shot at that.
I agree 100%, man. They look great. And Patty Mills, even Dame Lillard after the game talking about how international players playing for their home countries are different than in the NBA. Evan Fournier, excellent example with 28 points against Team USA in France. But Patty Mills, he gave them hell in the exhibition game and just is, much more confident. And imagine you're talking about them winning gold. They could have had Ben Simmons too. They could have had Ben Simmons. How did you guys feel out there? Because what part of it for me was that Simmons needed to go, to use the cliche, get back on the horse, right? Don't just get away from basketball, go work out with your comfort zone. Go play. Just go play internationally and make some plays and get over yourself that way seemed more logical to me. And then again, it's from the outside. It's easy for me to say that, but that seemed more logical to me than retreating back to the same workout pattern.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Of course, only he can know what he's going through personally and what's best for him just from a player development side. But by all accounts, that Australian national team environment with great leaders like Patty Mills and Ingles is a really welcoming place. And sure, there would have been pressure to perform, but I think there are a lot of ways that could have been a positive experience for him. And I think him making that decision increases the pressure a little more, if that was even possible, for him to return a better player with an expanded game the way he has not been in previous off seasons.
Absolutely. By the way, how does Patty Mills morph into LeBron James in international basketball? It's amazing, isn't it?
It's got to be the pride for me. I mean, and then to Noah's point and your question, I think let's look at all the stuff Matisse Thybulle is benefiting from being in that different environment of different coaches and, the camaraderie and the brotherhood and just having a chance to improve and grow and around, like-minded people and whatnot, and a place where you're welcome with open arms and embrace. I think it could have been a bit of a more inclusive bubble for Ben, but we don't know what he's going through, and they also had the bubble experience last year with, he got injured and whatnot. Maybe he's looking for an off season where he doesn't have to be as concerned about stuff like that. So, I mean, I was disappointing. I would say, I think a lot of people looked at it as because he had committed openly and said he would do it and then had to rescind it. I think, we were, talking about in the podcast, look at just what a difference a few months makes. Brett Brown was the coach and Ben Simmons was the marquee player, and they get neither of those dudes.
Yeah, neither of those dudes are there, and they're still I don't know. I'm sure they're not the betting gold medal favorite. I imagine the Americans are still the betting gold medal favorite, but if I were going to place money down at points bet, should I pimp points bet here just for NBC? If I were going to place money at points bet, I'd probably be leaning that way. It'd be.
You should have put some shekels on France yesterday. That's what we all should have done.
I know the guys from NBC Edge a little bit. They talked. I don't know if they ever said this on air. There were guys talking about, I want the USA to win, but I'm going to fade them in every game because they're just going to be way too big a favorite, man. They were 12-point favorites in that game.
Welcome to life as a Sixers fan. There's a lot of that going on in the city of brotherly love. Before we get you out of here, Kurt, anything you're working on right now you want to plug or mention before we sign off?
We're going to have a lot of draft coverage. Obviously, we'll have that night. There'll be live player-by-player breakdowns. And it's, by the way, a lot of trades probably coming. We talked about the Sixers making moves. I'll just, between that and the start of free agency, I'm hearing, I think what a lot of people are hearing, which is there's going to be a lot of movement. There's going to be a lot of teams trying to add what Philly's trying to add, right? Everybody's trying to add veteran help, and not necessarily just, obviously not just the Ben Simmons, Kyle Lowry, Dame Lillard level, but, and everybody's looking for their Jay Crowder, right? Everybody's looking for that kind of veteran who can step in. And I think you're going to see a lot of moves. So we're going to be all over the trades. We're going to be all over that stuff. And then I don't know if Noah's going to be there. I'm going to be in Vegas for Summer League. So we will have a lot of content out of Vegas as well.
I think LA has that title at the moment, but
yeah, exactly.
Right. But Kurt, we appreciate your time. We appreciate you spending a few extra minutes with us here as we're talking draft, Simmons, Team USA, and all of the above. We appreciate you all for listening and tuning in here on the Sixers Talk podcast. For Noah Levick, Kurt Helin, for Ben Berry, our esteemed producer, I'm Danny Pommells. This has been the Sixers Talk podcast brought to you by Wilmington University. Wilmu Works.